August 11th, 1984. Ronald Reagan is cracking jokes about bombing Russia into a hot mic. The Olympics are happening in LA without the Russians anyway, and somewhere in America, MTV is still showing actual music videos between their groundbreaking programming. This was the week Ghostbusters hit #1, cementing 1984 as the year when movie soundtracks officially became more important than actual albums. But here's the thing about this particular week in music history. It wasn't just about one ghost-busting anthem. The top 20 was absolutely packed with songs that would define the entire decade. This was peak MTV-era chaos, when a good video could make your career and a bad one could end it faster than you could say Nina Blackwood. Today we're diving into the top 10 from this legendary week, from Prince being Prince to unexpected collaborations that somehow worked. So let's take a trip back to when music videos had budgets, when crossing over meant something, and when the biggest controversies involved lawsuits over chord progressions. Ray Parker Jr., Ghostbusters. Here we are at #1 with Ray Parker Jr., the man who accidentally created the most legally problematic theme song of the decade. Ghostbusters wasn't just a movie tie-in, it was a cultural phenomenon that somehow made calling fictional exterminators seem like the most natural response to paranormal activity. The genius of this track was its complete shamelessness. Parker literally built the entire song around the hook, "Who you gonna call?" because he hated actually singing the word Ghostbusters. So he turned it into a call and response situation, which was brilliant, until Huey Lewis noticed it sounded suspiciously like, "I want a new drug." Cue the lawsuit that would drag on longer than most marriages. But the real magic was in that video, directed by Ivan Reitman himself, featuring every celebrity who could fit into a recording booth. Bill Murray looking confused, Danny DeVito looking enthusiastic, and Chevy Chase looking like he'd rather be literally anywhere else. It was peak 80s celebrity cameo culture, back when famous people would show up for anything if the craft services were decent. Prince, "When Doves Cry." At #2, we have Prince doing what Prince did best, taking conventional pop music wisdom and tossing it out the window of Paisley Park. "When Doves Cry" had no bass line, which in 1984 was like serving pizza without cheese. It shouldn't have worked, but this was Prince, so obviously it became one of the most iconic tracks of the decade. This song was everything that made Prince simultaneously fascinating and slightly terrifying to mainstream America. The track was basically 4 minutes of sexual tension set to a drum machine, delivered by a guy who looked like he'd stepped out of a particularly stylish fever dream. The video featured Prince in a bathtub, which was exactly the kind of imagery that made parents very nervous about what their kids were watching on MTV. The song came from Purple Rain, which wasn't just an album, it was a cultural takeover. Prince was having the kind of year that made other artists question their life choices. While everyone else was trying to figure out how to make music videos, Prince was making art that happened to have a beat you could dance to. The Jacksons with Mick Jagger, State of Shock. Speaking of unexpected collaborations, here's what happened when Michael Jackson's family decided they needed some Rolling Stones energy injected into their sound. Actually, this was originally supposed to be Michael with Freddie Mercury, but scheduling conflicts. Then somehow, Mick Jagger showed up and suddenly we had the most unlikely duet since peanut butter met jelly. There was some rumored friction during the recording sessions, but nobody ever went on record with the tea. This track was peak 80s collaboration culture. Throw two massive stars together, add some synthesizers, and see what happens. Jagger brought his trademark swagger to the Jackson family's polished pop sensibilities, creating something that sounded like it was recorded in an alternate universe where the Beatles and the Stones actually did make an album together. The whole thing was beautifully ridiculous, which was very on-brand for 1984. This was the year when musical boundaries were more like suggestions. And if you could get Mick Jagger to show up to your recording session, you absolutely did not ask questions about artistic coherence. Tina Turner, what's love got to do with it? And here's Tina Turner proving that comeback stories don't have to be subtle. After years of struggle and rebuilding her career from scratch, Turner delivered this track like she was personally settling scores with everyone who'd written her off. This wasn't just a song, it was a statement of independence set to a drum machine. The track represented everything that was working in 80s pop music. It had the electronic production that MTV loved, the emotional intensity that radio couldn't resist, and Turner's voice, which could have made a grocery list sound profound. This song didn't just cross over, it conquered, earning Turner 3 Grammys and proving that talent plus determination could overcome pretty much anything. Turner's story was particularly satisfying because it happened at exactly the right cultural moment. The 80s were all about reinvention, and here was an artist who'd literally reinvented her entire life. Sometimes the most powerful music comes from people who have nothing left to lose. Elton John's sad songs say so much. Here's Sir Elton proving that sometimes the most obvious song titles are also the most effective. Sad Songs Say So Much was basically Elton John writing the instruction manual for emotional processing, decades before therapy became trendy. The man understood that sometimes you don't need complex metaphors. You just need someone to acknowledge that yes, sad songs do indeed say so much. This track was peak Elton craftsmanship, designed specifically with his Breaking Hearts tour in mind. He knew exactly what would work in arenas full of people who needed permission to feel their feelings in public. Sometimes the best pop music is just emotional permission slips set to piano and synthesizers. The whole thing was beautifully straightforward in a year full of experimental weirdness. While Prince was removing bass lines and everyone else was adding drum machines, Elton just delivered classic songcraft with enough 80s production gloss to feel current. Lionel Richie, Stuck on You. And here's Lionel Richie, fresh off his Commodore's breakup and ready to prove he could be smooth as a solo act. Stuck on You was Richie's country-leaning love letter to crossover success, complete with just enough twang to get Nashville's attention without alienating his R&B bass. This was Richie in full romantic crooner mode, treating every love song like it was a personal mission to make America feel things. The track worked because Richie understood that sometimes the most sophisticated move is just being ridiculously sincere about being in love. No irony, no winking at the camera, just pure, unfiltered romantic optimism. The song's success proved that crossover didn't have to mean compromise. Richie found a way to honor both his R&B roots and his country ambitions, creating something that felt natural rather than calculated. Sometimes the best art comes from the refusing to choose sides. Bruce Springsteen, Dancing in the Dark. Here's Bruce Springsteen, the working-class hero who accidentally created the blueprint for every awkward wedding dance moment for the next 4 decades. Dancing in the Dark was peak Springsteen, all earnest emotion and blue-collar poetry, delivered with the kind of sincerity that made cynicism temporarily impossible. But let's talk about that video because it introduced the world to a young Courtney Cox getting pulled on stage to dance with the boss. This was before Friends, before she became America's sweetheart. This was just a young woman who happened to be in the right place when Brian De Palma was looking for someone to embody pure joy on camera. The whole thing was beautifully analog, in a way that's almost quaint now. No CGI, no special effects, just Bruce, a stage, and the kind of authentic excitement that you can't fake. It was MTV-era simplicity at its finest, back when the most high-tech thing in a music video was decent lighting. Dan Hartman, I Can Dream About You. From the Streets of Fire soundtrack comes Dan Hartman with the most meta music video of 1984. The clip featured actors lip-syncing to Hartman's vocals while he sang about dreaming, which was basically a visual representation of how most music videos worked anyway, but with more self-awareness. This was peak soundtrack synergy, back when movies and music videos were having a beautiful, profitable love affair. Hartman created the perfect fantasy pop confection, all synthetic emotion and glossy production values that somehow felt more real than actual reality. The track worked because it didn't pretend to be anything more than pure escapism. Sometimes the most honest art is the kind that admits it's just trying to make you feel good for 3.5 minutes. Rod Stewart, Infatuation. Here's Rod Stewart with one of his bigger late-career chart entries, proving that sometimes the most effective music videos are the ones that commit completely to being weird little movies. Infatuation was directed by Jonathan Kaplan and filmed mostly in black and white, inspired by Hitchcock's Rear Window. The video featured Stewart as a full-on stalker, using binoculars to spy on his new neighbor, played by Kay Lenz. while his apartment walls were covered with pictures he'd taken of her in various stages of dress and undress. This was peak 80s music video storytelling, taking a pop song and turning it into a mini thriller complete with mobsters, bodyguards, and a surreal carousel ending. The song reached number 6 on the Billboard Hot 100 and showed that Stewart could absolutely adapt to the MTV era's demand for cinematic storytelling, treating a simple pop song like it deserves full Hollywood treatment, complete with actual actors and plot twists. The 80s were all about taking everything just a little too seriously, and this video was a perfect example of that beautiful excess. Corey Hart, Sunglasses at Night. From Canada comes Corey Hart, the man who convinced an entire generation that wearing sunglasses indoors wasn't just acceptable, it was practically mandatory. This song was the birth of what we now recognize as peak 80s aesthetic. Neon, leather, and an inexplicable commitment to unnecessary eyewear. Hart delivered this track with the kind of earnest intensity that suggested wearing sunglasses at night was actually a matter of personal philosophy rather than questionable fashion choices. The video was basically a tutorial on how to look mysterious while standing under fluorescent lights, which was a very specific skill set that 1984 absolutely demanded. The genius was in its complete commitment to the bit. Hart didn't wink at the camera or acknowledge that the premise was ridiculous. He treated nocturnal sunglasses like they were essential survival equipment, and somehow that total sincerity made the whole thing work. Sometimes the best art comes from taking your weirdest ideas completely seriously. And there you have it. The top 10 from August 11th, 1984, when the charts were packed with everything from ghost-busting anthems to Canadian eyewear philosophy. This was peak MTV-era madness, when movie soundtracks ruled the world, when collaborations were gloriously random, and when the line between rebellion and mainstream success was basically non-existent. Which one of these top 10 hits still gets stuck in your head? Are you still trying to figure out when doves actually cry? Or practicing your best Corey Hart mysterious stare? Drop a comment and let me know which August 1984 chart topper owns a piece of your soul, and I'll see you in part 2, where we dive into the hair metal, the dance floors, and the lawsuit drama that made the rest of this week legendary.